Welcome to the fourth phase, the redesign phase of Rethink Health's pathway for transforming regional health. I'm Ruth Wagaman, one of Rethink Health's directors of our stewardship work, and I want to share with you in this presentation what we've learned about the typical challenges that leaders face in stewarding their regional efforts into and through the redesign phase of the journey. If you'd like to explore an overview of the pathway, you can find that presentation in the stewardship guides on Rethink Health's website. As with each phase, we'll address in this presentation the key pitfalls and the momentum builders that characterize Phase 4. If you'd like to identify which phase your own effort is in, you can find the Pathway Self-Diagnostic tool on the main Stewardship Guide's webpage. Let's explore how groups move forward after they have united and aligned their efforts around a big long-term vision and begun to engage their residents. There are efforts that make it beyond Phase 3 into Phase 4, the redesign phase, and there are three main reasons that these efforts continue moving. First, they create the full range of structures that are needed to steward a complex redesign effort across many organizations. Second, they understand the potential areas of resistance to change. And third, they've created a context where new ideas and radical redesigns can develop, flourish, and spread. The primary work of the redesign phase is captured in its name. A region is in Phase 4 when organizations in the health system are working together to redesign critical processes. Processes such as how and where care is received, how citizens get involved in their own care, how people are paid, how the system will be financed in the long run. Many of these questions will require discontinuous change or disruptive innovations, major changes to current processes that are not just incremental improvements. The kinds of innovations that mark the redesign phase directly challenge the status quo, and they call upon organizations to rethink their ways of doing business. Another key marker of the redesign phase is that far more energy is focused on spreading to other parts of the community the innovations that have shown results elsewhere, or scaling to the whole region pilots that have been designed and implemented for only a small geography or population. The major work of the redesign phase requires not just an improvement stance, therefore, but an invention and transformation stance. It requires a healthy ecology of innovation, conditions that promote and support the invention of a whole new way of operating. While align efforts have institutions largely working independently of each other on pieces of shared priorities, the redesign phase is about organizations working together towards goals for the whole system and investing in relationships and partnerships that affect their ways of doing business. Finally, to keep momentum in the redesign phase, the stewardship structure must evolve as well, developing toward a broadly legitimate set of groups that can make decisions and shape the priorities of the region. One early Phase 4 effort exists in the northeastern United States. This transformative effort has been led by one urban safety net hospital, facing hundreds of millions of dollars not being reimbursed to them by the state. This created the impetus for them to ask, can we survive? What would the system be that we would be proud of in 5 years? So this institution has been engaged in rethinking and redesigning its relationship with its community for years, achieving great results in reducing unnecessary hospitalizations through deep community partnerships. They recognized that all those savings were going to the payer and not to the hospital or to the community. So some forward-thinking leadership, rather than buckling down to do more with less, to cut staff and resources and services, they redesigned. They struck a deal for capitated payments, engaged their employees across the whole organization in thinking about a new way of working with patients. They built an internal culture of investing in human system transformation, not just becoming more efficient where they needed to, although they did that as well, but investing in information systems and investing in developing the skills of their providers to work with people in new ways. Some critical aspects of this emerging example are that they benefited from senior leaders who were willing to ask tough questions and to consider a new business model. They built and sustained a partnership-wide emphasis in the hospital and jointly with the community focused on learning, including reaching out to change efforts in other regions around the country to learn from them about reimagining and redesigning care in collaboration with their community. Like all the phases of the pathway, efforts in the redesign phase are vulnerable to certain pitfalls that are a direct consequence of success in earlier phases. We're going to cover 3 different pitfalls of the redesign phase, and then address each one in turn by describing the momentum builders that leaders can put in place to help avoid these pitfalls. One common pitfall of the redesign phase that comes directly from success in earlier phases is a continuing focus on improvement and incremental change, which has worked extremely well in the past, and a real reluctance to consider radical redesign. Leaders of major organizations may lack the vision or the change leadership capacity to take on discontinuous change or to build commitment to whole new business models. Boards of directors may continue to reward chief executives for making only small changes, for sticking to a current strategy, and for taking few risks so they can maintain a healthy bottom line. This continuing focus on eking out a few more savings or a few more improvements in the redesign phase is particularly risky for regional change efforts because minor improvements can kill the sense of urgency that's needed to redouble efforts toward real transformation. And we often see that even in the face of significant external pressures for change, such as changes in state policies or serious threats to the finances of an organization, the normal reaction is to do more of the same, even more intently, rather than to radically redesign. A second common challenge to Phase 4 efforts is political resistance. The work of Phase 4 requires organizations to allow other groups and institutions to influence their decisions. The assumption that each institution is completely self-governing and can and should go about its business, cooperating where possible and useful, but largely making independent choices about their business models, about their practices and strategies. That stance can't hold if a truly transformed system is going to emerge. The healthcare system in particular has to become open to redesigning its business models and its relationship with other organizations. The interdependence of organizations is a very challenging tightrope walk for most leaders. They see their leadership job as doing their best on behalf of their own organizations and the whole, but there are circumstances when the two can be in direct competition with each other, or at least feel that way, as they struggle to promote the performance of their own enterprise. How can they do their jobs, both as organizational leaders and as stewards? A third common pitfall of Phase 4 is that successful models don't replicate when organizations try to spread them. Improvements in practice that have been tried in one context or with one subpopulation that showed promising results don't necessarily show the same impact when they're taken up and implemented in other places or with a broader scope of participants. It's often difficult to get funders excited about replicating existing models, and so efforts to spread or scale can be under-resourced, and having few resources to promote them may account in part for why efforts to spread an effective model don't produce results. The excitement of making something work in an earlier pilot phase can lead people to put tremendous effort in at the beginning, to put an innovation under such scrutiny that it leads to visible successes. But that same level of investment isn't sustainable for every effort. And if the leaders of the effort didn't invest enough in learning about the conditions for success, pilot projects don't replicate well in other settings. And as a consequence, energy and funding may both wind up in sharp decline. But it doesn't have to be that way. Redesign phase efforts can navigate these serious risks by focusing on a small handful of momentum builders that promote and sustain real redesign toward transformed health. One critical aspect of sustaining momentum in Phase 4 is deepening and broadening the stewardship bench and creating the full range of structures that are needed to steward a complex redesign effort across many organizations. A Phase 4 effort can draw on the determination of the large, aligned group of innovators and residents that are bought into the vision to hold leaders' feet to the fire about rethinking their business models. At the same time, stewardship groups must create forums where the survival needs of institutions are respected and listened to, where members can be and are open to discussing the big thorny issues and changing core practices such as pay, funding, and priorities that affect their organizations in deep and potentially threatening ways. In Phase 4, stewardship forums increase radically in complexity. There's no single structural arrangement that can address the stewardship needs of every region, but certain common features of the stewardship structure are needed to address critical Phase 4 challenges. First, multiple groups may serve different stewardship functions that together promote transformative change. There's still a need for an overarching stewardship structure. For example, we see here a stewardship team at the center, leading for the whole. Usually there's a small subset of core stewards or champions of the effort who serve special leadership functions within the effort. There are cross-organizational coordinating efforts of innovators leading particular redesign efforts. There are the residents within the region who guide the vision. And in addition, particular councils might support dialogue among like organizations for dealing with the controversial matters within a sector. A hospital forum for addressing competitive capital investments, for example, or a convening of social services providers and community organizations for addressing capacity. Finally, there should be some kind of backbone organization, often called integrators or quarterbacks, who serve as the anchoring staff that enable the effectiveness of these other groups and are the glue for the effort. While the precise structures and groups will be different across regions, these are key stewardship functions for any Phase 4 effort. I said earlier that political resistance is a common pitfall in Phase 4. One tool that can help rebuild strained relationships is a tool we call understanding accidental adversaries. Sometimes partnerships break when their relationship becomes dominated by adversarial behavior. Generally, two parties choose to work together because they receive mutual benefit from the relationship. Each takes action to benefit the other in the belief that if the alliance works, both parties will benefit. A problem arises when one or both parties need to correct a performance gap for their own organization. That's often precipitated by some external change or pressure. They take action to improve performance, and they do it in ways that accidentally undermine their partner's success. The impact of this dynamic can actually reach the point of turning them into hostile adversaries. This tool is designed to help you reflect in your regional effort about relationships between organizations that have traveled this route and what you can do to rebuild and sustain collaboration by addressing and overcoming this pattern. A second critical momentum builder for the redesign phase of the pathway is building a shared culture of innovation. The core infrastructure of innovation, an investment in a culture of learning, has to begin in the align phase, but it's also essential for progress in the redesign phase, where a hospitable culture, structure, and funding system for altering practices and spreading successful innovations is core to the work of the design phase. Convening the core leadership of a redesign phase effort around a determination to radically rethink what is possible is one means of sustaining momentum to bring about that desired future. Finally, if you've identified your change effort as presently in about Phase 4, the redesign phase of the pathway, and you'd like to learn more about how you can focus your activities to build more momentum for change, the developmental assessment can help you understand more about what the strengths and weaknesses are of your regional effort. Rethink Health, working with many leaders like you around the United States, has identified 11 conditions, which together increase the chances over time that real transformative change takes root and leads to greater and greater impact and ultimately to a radically better system. Each one of these 11 conditions, from stewardship of a system strategy through a local culture of health, is an important part of your change effort at every phase of the pathway. The developmental assessment can help you rate your effort on each of these 11 conditions. If you want to move beyond the redesign phase of the pathway, take a look at your scores on the 11 conditions. The more that are scoring 4 or better, Phase 4 on the pathway or better, the more momentum you have going for your effort. Consider completing the developmental assessment with the key change leaders who are most critical to your regional effort. We've covered in this presentation some of the key pitfalls and momentum builders for Phase 4, the redesign phase of regional health transformation. In the next presentation, we will cover the last phase of the pathway, the integrate phase, and we'll explore what's involved in stewarding an effort into and through Phase 5. In order to download the tools that are described in this presentation, and to learn more about moving your effort through and beyond the redesign phase of the pathway, please visit rethinkhealth.org/redesign.